explain it about, when you're given pencils to ink, you got a line there. It's your choice whether you ink on the outside of the line or the inside of the line. Whether, the fat part of the strokes at the beginning or, that's...
I like the word...
90% of the choice on that is the inkers.
You said magic twice. I think that's a great word to connect with Wood. There was something magical in his work. Also, another word I'd like to use is charm. It didn't matter what the subject matter was. There was some inherent, magical, wonderful charm. Whether it was the line,
look in the eye.
Oh, he had a
right side. Look at the eye and the stance. And there's lots of people that can draw technically beautiful. But there's something missing in the eyes. Or there's something a little not right about the gesture and stance. And Woody could just draw this the things that seem like throwaway. Like in the mad jobs, it would be like this little kid in the corner with snot coming out of his mouth. That kid. And it would maybe like 15 strokes. It was like, nailing it. Yeah. And nailing it is what it was about.
The other thing interesting was he had characters, little characters, a lot of which he had created actually when he was a child. And they would pop up. They could pop up anywhere. He had a character that was just an eyeball with feet and I think he had little arms. And he would pop up anywhere, and he would do it. It may pop up in Mag, then it would pop up again in Wits End. His character Bucky Ruckus, they did a newspaper strip, but long before that, he was working on Bucky at least a decade before that strip was done. And he used Bucky after the strip too.
What you should say about some of the artists that give you a line. Carmen Vicino was the kind of, just as a little side note here, Carmen Vicino would be the kind of artist that give you several lines. In other words, you have like 3 lines. Yeah, you have 3 lines on everything, and he's almost saying to you here, you choose what line and work with it. Okay, fine. That's I learned that. Well, actually, I learned when inking him on Star Wars and a few other things. It was difficult at the beginning, definitely, but I learned.
Exactly.
Exactly. But yeah, but it was a great education because he actually was telling you, think for yourself in certain aspects. So yeah.
But Carmine did have a lot of really good gestures.
Oh, great gestures.
Really, nice. Yeah.
Woody never inked Carmine, did he? Or did he?
I can't think of Woody ever.
It would have been an interesting combination.
Yeah, very different.
Yeah.
Totally different approach. Like you said, structural. Woody was structural. Carmine was structural too, but the developed Carmine was actually off of modern art. He went back to school and he studied modern art that had nothing to do with illustration, nothing to do with comics. And he studied under Jack Potter at SVA and a couple other people. But I can't think of any. There were a lot of one-off things. One that he inked one issue of Captain America drawn by Gene Colan. Colan never knew about it. That was in about 1971, 70 or 71. I was spending a lot of time with Colan about 82, 10 years later, and I mentioned that comic, and he's like, what are you talking about? He had no idea. And I went home, got the comic, brought it back, and showed it to Gene, and he couldn't believe it. And his wife too, like, oh, look how beautifully he tightened up your pencil. And I like to call Wood the great collaborator. And he was sought out by a lot of people. He was sought out by Stan, he was sought out by Jack Kirby, he was sought out by Peter Max. They did a collaboration together in 1969. And a lot of people, but he would always bring so much to the table. And he would take it beyond. It's like the sum was even more than the parts. Like Sky Masters. It's like you've got Kirby, you've got Wood, but together they made a new entity, Kirby Wood. It's not just Kirby inked by someone. It's like a new thing. And Kirby was very proud of that strip. And anytime he would hold the art, and you can have see photos of Kirby in his studio, he's got Sky Masters right on the wall.
Very nice.
Yes, absolutely. And that was an ironic situation when Eisner, Woody was going to school at SBA, and he started helping Eisner, just doing backgrounds and erasing pencils, and very basic things, lettering. But then after he got big at EC, the Spirit strip was going down the tubes. And Eisner was busy with his new company, doing things for the government, educational comics. And he called Woody and said, look, I want you to come try to save the Spirit. And we're going to send him in outer space, because that was the new thing. The science fiction was all the rage. And Wood, he had proven that he was the top science fiction comic artist at that point. It was about 52, if I remember correctly. And he came over. Unfortunately, he had an absolute full workload at EC. He was doing, I forget exactly, but he would do sometimes 2 stories in one of the science fiction comics, 1 story in the other science fiction comic, and then he'd do a story like a shock suspense story or crime suspense as well, and in the workload. He had a full slate, but he couldn't hardly turn down the opportunity. It was both for Eisner, who he got and considered a mentor, and then also it was newspaper related, which was a high point. So he tried to do it. It lasted for a little while, and while it lasted, it was brilliant. And Eisner said some beautiful things. I called Eisner many years later and got a couple of quotes from him, and he said now he was amazed looking back on it decades later how modern it looked. That it's hard to know now, if you weren't around then, Wood stuff in the 50s really looked very, very modern. It was like a total breath of fresh air. And by the time, again, things were changing so fast in the 60s, by the time the 70s are there, in a way you could say his stuff in some ways looked old-fashioned. But he had been the absolute cutting edge of the 50s.
You know, he tried out to take over the PS better than agency.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, I worked on that. We did 5 pages of samples and bid on it. The problem was it was a government contract,
Right.
and Eisner was giving it up. These are early 70s, and there were all these people.
I would assume that's when Murphy Anderson got it.
Murphy Anderson got it. Yeah, I think he beat out Woody. It was bidding.
Right.
The underbidding.
Right.
You don't have too much quality in the government.
Yeah, they're after quality. They're always clear against the job. We could have had a Wally Wood. But, I mean, there's just so many things to talk about with Wood. Maybe we should go to
I'd like, if they'd like to hear about that Prince Valiant piece he did. I know that was so beautiful. I thought he was like the perfect artist for that particular comic strip.
Yeah. There's one little thing most people don't know about that deal, but Wood was influenced by a number of people, Al Foster, Will Eisner, Alex Raymond, and Milton Caniff. I would say those are the top.
Those are tough.
There's other
He
people.
like Mark Messer and Lou Fine.
Yeah, Lou Fine. In fact, when he did Lightning, the Thunder Agents, there's a lot of Lou Fine swipes in there.
There's a lot of his use of blacks. Really is sort of really invested.
Where was I going?
The Prince Valiant strip.
Oh, Prince Valiant. So, but when people would ask him who was your top influence, he would always go with Hal Foster. Wood, Frazetta, Joe Kubert, those guys were all, the #1 guy was Hal Foster. And so for him to be invited to possibly take over from Hal Foster, and personally picked by Hal Foster, that meant a lot to him. But Foster, there was a short list of potential candidates. It was Wood, Ray Morrow, and what's the other guy? John Colan Murphy. Nobody knows this. There was a 4th person, there was a 4th candidate. The 4th candidate was Al Williams. And when Al got the invitation, he's like, no. There's some footprints you don't dare travel. And so he declined the invitation to do a sample. And I imagine that, it was as great of an honor as it was to be invited. it must have hurt him too to not have got that job.
Tremendous pressure.
It would have been. And I think, I mean, okay, I'm gonna cut to a quick chase here. Woody had problems. People have problems, I've got problems, I bet most of you have. Woody had problems. He was an early guy to start going into psychiatrist treatment, group therapy, different things. And it's not an easy business to work with. Comic books is a very difficult business. And I think at a point when he started seeing his colleagues, even when he was ahead of them, like in EC, nobody was, all that talent that came out of EC, Kurtzman, geniuses. Kurtzman, Rosetta, Jack Davis, Al Williams, Elder, I mean, geniuses, brilliant talents. Ray Amigos, nobody, at that time when it was happening, they all looked at Wood. They wanted to know what he was doing, and they were like, oh, no, what can I do, you know? They were all looking to him. But as the years progressed, he started seeing other people. You know, somebody asked him one time later, did you ever imagine that Frank Rosetta would become as big as he is? He's like, nobody thought that Frank was going to go into oil paintings. Nobody thought that he was going to basically create a new visual genre. I mean, the stories have been around since the 30s, Conan stories. Nobody captured it, but Frank created a visual genre the way Robert E. Howard had created the literary genre. So I think that, you know, Kurtzman's success, whether with Lil Annie Fanny or with Mad, Rosetta's success with oil paintings, Jack Davis's success with advertising, but at the same time, then one would say, well, I don't want to do the advertising because you got to do a committee, you know, or a lot of corrections, things like that. So he's kind of making his own choices. But I'm sure that was, it's kind of tough. It's like, you know, he had a lot of things to deal with. I forgot where that was taken. Oh, the strip, the Prince Valiant. I think had he got it, it would have been very tough to keep that. It couldn't have. So in that way, it's probably good he did. He did get that original, which meant a lot. Anybody got a question?
You were talking about other agents with Dynamo and No Man and stuff. I like Wood a lot, and you were talking about inking and what have you. Who was drawing and who was inking on those? Because actually, that's not my favorite Wood at all. How was that different than, say, whoever he was working with Daredevil?
I recommend that you look at the material again.
Okay.
And some of it varies from one story to another considerably. It's like suddenly there'll be a story that's just a masterpiece, and then you get some fairly practically sophomore material. But there's also interesting humor in the Thunder Ages material that kind of can work on multiple levels. There are things in there that obviously were not designed for 10-year-old kids. You know, that it was humor. It's not risque. It's just a humor that's 10-year more sophisticated than a 10-year-old kid. But so he's kind of almost writing it in a way to entertain himself, and that's an example. Although he was trying to simplify his process to be able to crank more work out to earn a living, he always had the love of comics in there, and I find it actually really very moving. He went through hell, and all the stuff he went through, as hard as he fought this battle or that battle, his love of the medium was always there. But there was a big studio situation. In fact, I heard one story was that when he got all the guys working on Thunder Ages, or it may have actually been, he forgot about a deadline on a Jungle Jim job, and they had to crank out like a whole issue of Jungle Jim, you know, in like 2 days. And he called like everybody he knew, and they were up there at his studio, and Ditko and all kinds of Pearson and a bunch of people were coming up. And Wood called his wife at the time, his first wife, Katjana, over, and he had a big grin. He's like, just pointing them out. To him, he thrived on that. It reminded him of the original studio, like in 1950 with Joe Orlando and Harry Harrison and Roy Krenkel. And he just loved that idea that we have our own little cottage industry here, and everybody's just working away. You know, it's almost like the elves in Santa's workshop, you know, in a way. And they're making we're making the magic here.
Woody had a great story about that. It was a story that he used to tell his assistants, you know, as a cautionary tale, about the little old cartoonist who was really behind on his deadlines. He just couldn't keep his eyes open any longer. And he falls asleep at the drawing table. And while he's asleep, all these little elves come in. You know, it's a story. You know, and they finish the whole job for the little old cartoonist. And when the cartoonist wakes up, he looks at his board and he looks at the pages. And he goes, "Wow, this really sucks."
That would be great. Somebody should draw that and make the cartoons look like Woody.
Yeah, because that's, you know, what he was getting at is like, you know, like, don't try to do what they do, you know, overreaching as the system.
What was that? I'm fascinated with that photo of it's like you with long hair. Everybody's got guns. What? Tell me whatever happened. What's the deal with that photo?
Well, we were at Woody's first studio in Connecticut, and I think we had gone to the quarry to do some shooting, and you know, and he had a 44 Magnum, bolt action rifles, so Wayne Howard had we just set up the camera and said, "Oh, let's take a picture."
That's a fabulous picture.
He sort of looks like Warren Oates in the Wild Bunch.
Yeah, you know, I think Warren Oates could have played it in a movie.
Yeah.
You know, I really hope that someday there could be a biopic on Woody. Yeah, I want to make one comment about the Wally. He always preferred to be called Woody. I was even talking to Everett Bremen Kinsler, knew him in the 50s when they worked at Avon. He says, "Oh, I always knew him as Woody. We used to go out to lunch together. We'd bump into each other in Avon, we'd go out to lunch." But he was actually raised as Wally. His parents called him Wally. His brother still calls him Wally. His friends in the 50s called him Wally. Williams.
John always called him Wallace.
Yeah, and she still does. And the Williamson called him Wally, Rosetta always called him Wally, Orlando called him Wally. But at some point, now Pearson told the story. It's a pretty heavy story, I don't know if I can tell it quite right. But I think it may have been in Bob Stewart's book, Against the Grain, which is about to be re-released and revised through Fantagraphics with a slightly different title. I highly recommend that book. Wood was being strange. I don't know if he had a long bender weekend or something, and Pearson comes in like on Monday or something, and he says something about little Wally Wood, and then Wood got really upset and got in his face. "Who told you about that?" He's like, "You did, Woody." And so it's almost like he had like different sides of his personality, and somehow he related to a youthful version of himself as little Wally Wood. And the older he got, by the time you were hanging around the most in the early 70s, there was something about that he was trying to push away from. And so I think that had the connotation, the Wally connotation, grew to have a negative effect on him. But he also realized, from a commercial standpoint, there was a value to Wally. And up until the end, occasionally he would sign an autograph as Wally, or he would even sign, if you look on the cover of Heroes Incorporated #1, 1969, he signs copyright Wally. So he would pick and choose, but regularly he always absolutely, without any question, prefer Wood. All right, how many minutes we got? We got 3 minutes. I wish I knew who his psychiatrist was. I'd love to talk to him. I don't know, what. Was it her?
Married her.
Well, now my understanding was she worked with, there was a group therapist, and she was like his nurse or worked with him. Yeah, his second wife, Marilyn Silk. I actually was contacted by her son not too long ago. He said, I got an email that says Wallace Wood was my dad. And I'm like, oh yeah? So, it would be, he was a stepdad for a little while. It'd be very interesting to know what any psychological diagnosis on what he would have been. I think that would be
Talked about a lot. His favorite subject.
Yeah. All right, what do we got? 1 minute? 1 minute. Yes, sir. What do I think of it? I think it's a landmark in comics history. It could be called a lot of things. Some people call it the first prozine. It was a bridge between the overground and the underground. It predates that by about a year. He did have underground, like what's his name, Roger. There were a couple underground guys. Roger Brand, Baudet, and those guys idolized him. I call Kurtzman and Wood the fathers of the underground. All those, that whole underground movement, they were all inspired by EC and Mad Max. And if you look up, I was around, I was buying those comics when they were first coming out. They weren't on comic shops. They were selling them at head shops. Okay? And I would say it seemed like half the covers were homages to EC covers, where they had the heads or some kind of artwork on the side and things like that. So those guys all, and to be able to be an underground cartoonist and to be able to do something with either Kurtzman or Wood, that was great validation. And Fantagraphics just did, for the first time, Wiacek has been reprinted for the first time ever. They did 2 hardback volumes in a slipcase. They're practically sold out. If you haven't got it, I really recommend you try to find it quick. There's a slight possibility they may do a soft cover in a year or two. But I know for a fact that those hardcovers are really close to being sold out.
You really look at certain items, a lot of what we're doing.
Yes. And also, we could get into a whole conversation about the influence of both of them on Wizards, on Backsheet Wizards. Ladies and gentlemen, we're done. We're on aisle 500.